The HOA ran a pipeline straight through my ranch without asking, warning, or even pretending to care. One morning, I woke up to the roar of bulldozers tearing into the land I'd built my life around. They flattened the old oak I planted for my late wife, right in front of my granddaughter, who stood there clutching her drawing pad, crying quietly while her world fell apart. At the front of the chaos stood Carla Withers, the HOA president, a woman with a permanent smirk and a clipboard she treated like a weapon. Behind her was a sheriff, clearly uncomfortable but too afraid to challenge her. "It's for the good of the community," she said coldly, like that somehow excused everything. That was the day I made a promise. They'd regret ever touching this land. But what none of them knew was that their entire project, their pride and joy, was built on a lie that would soon make me the most powerful man in this valley. It started quietly with no letters, no warnings, just a flash of orange out by the creek. I was fixing a board on the porch while my granddaughter, Elise, sketched beside me. You get to know the rhythm of your own land after years of living on it, the way the wind moves through the trees, the sound of the hawk circling above, the whisper of water down the slope. But bright safety vests and metal tripods, that didn't belong here. I told Elise to stay on the porch and started toward the creek. My knees aren't what they used to be, but anger can make a man move faster than he should. 3 surveyors stood on my side of the fence, pounding stakes into the dirt like they owned the place. I stopped a few feet away and said calmly, "Morning. You fellas lost?" The man with the clipboard didn't even look up. "Just doing our job, sir." I pointed to my fence line. "Your job's 50 yards the other way. This is private property." He sighed like I was the problem and muttered, "We're authorized. HOA easement extension." I almost laughed. "I'm not in your HOA, never have been. This ranch was here before your little community even existed." He just shrugged and said, "Tell it to them." Then he turned his back on me. That kind of arrogance burned slow and deep. This ranch wasn't just dirt and fences. I bought it after my wife, Claire, passed away. It was supposed to be our dream, a quiet piece of land where life couldn't push us around anymore. After she was gone, it became my way to keep her close. Then, when my daughter and son-in-law died in a car crash 2 years later, this land became the only home my granddaughter had left. I planted that oak for Claire, up on the ridge overlooking the creek. And Elise and I would sit beneath it on warm evenings, talking about the woman she barely remembered. So, when 3 days after the surveyors came back, Carla showed up at my gate with 2 deputies and a stack of legal papers. I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding, and it was war. Carla stood at my gate like she already owned everything she could see. Late 50s, hair pulled tight enough to match her attitude, and a stack of paperwork in her hand she waved around like a victory flag. "Mr. Travis," she said, not a greeting, more like a warning. "We're here about the pipeline." One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably, while the other kept his eyes straight ahead, pretending to be stone. Carla flipped through her papers and announced, "The community board has approved a new water line. Construction begins next week. Everything's legal." I told her what I'd told the surveyors. "This is private property. You have no rights here." She smiled, that cold, bureaucratic smile people wear when they know. They've got the law twisted just enough in their favor. "We found a clause in the old county filings," she said smoothly. "Perfectly legal. The line's going in whether you like it or not." Then she turned, on her heel and left, leaving tire tracks of arrogance on my driveway. I spent the next few days burning through my savings, calling every property lawyer I could find. Most didn't even bother returning my calls. The one who did, an older man named Harris, met me for coffee. He looked over the papers. Carla had shoved in my face and sighed like he'd seen this kind of thing before. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said quietly. "They found an old public utility clause from the 70s. It's legal, but it's dirty. You could fight it, but it'd drain you dry. Before you ever saw a courtroom." I sat there, staring at the papers, the weight of it pressing down like a mountain. They had everything: money, lawyers, and a system built to protect them. All I had was my land, and a piece of paper that apparently didn't mean a damn thing anymore. I walked out of that cafe with my stomach hollow and my hands trembling. The following Monday, I woke to the sound that would haunt me for weeks. A deep, metallic growl shaking the ground. Bulldozers. The kind of sound you never expect to hear on your own property. I stood on my porch with a cold mug of coffee in hand, watching the machines crawl across my pasture. tearing through the soil like it was nothing. Elise came to my side, holding my arm, her eyes wide and wet. She didn't cry out loud, but her silence was louder than any scream. The first dozer reached the ridge, the one where Claire's oak stood. I wanted to stop them, to stand in front of it and make them push me instead. But that would have been pointless. They had deputies, paperwork, and excuses. I had grief. The blade hit the trunk with a crash that echoed through the valley. The tree groaned once, then gave way. It fell in slow motion, a lifetime of memories splintering into dust. Elise let out a quiet sob and I just held her, feeling something inside me break and something else start to harden. When the machines moved on, I walked to the ridge and picked up a small piece of bark from the ground. It smelled like rain, earth, and everything I'd lost. They thought they'd just cleared a tree. But they'd planted something else that day, and a seed of vengeance that was already starting to grow. After the bulldozers left, silence fell over the ranch. The kind that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. Every time I looked out toward that ridge, I saw the bare patch of dirt where Claire's oak used to stand. And the sound of that engine echoed in my mind. I tried to keep calm for Elise's sake, but inside, something was turning cold and sharp. I knew I couldn't fight machines with anger or fists. I needed to use something stronger, patience and proof. So, when I heard the HOA was holding a public meeting that Thursday, I cleaned the dust off my boots, tucked my property deeds into a folder, and drove into their perfect little world. The community clubhouse smelled like bleach and fake lemon. Bright posters about neighborhood pride covered the walls, each one more ironic than the last. The room was half empty, a handful of bored residents, staring at their phones while the HOA board sat up front behind a folding table like they were holding court. And there she was, Carla Withers, sitting at the center like a queen in her plastic throne, tapping her pen on a stack of files. When my turn to speak came, I walked up to the podium, my voice steady even though my heart was pounding. "My ranch has been in my family for over 30 years, I began. It's outside your HOA boundaries and has no shared utilities with your development. You're cutting into private land, and you've destroyed personal property." Carla didn't even let me finish. She raised her hand with that smug little smile and said, "Thank you for your comments. Mr. Travis," the lawyer beside her, slick hair, slicker voice, stood up and handed me a document. It was a cease and desist order. "You are hereby prohibited from interfering with authorized community construction," he said, sounding like he'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. "As a courtesy, you'll still have access to the HOA's main water line." A courtesy, on my own land. My blood boiled, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me explode. I just nodded once, folded the paper, and walked out. They thought that was the end of it. They couldn't have been more wrong. As I stepped into the parking lot, a man caught up to me. Gray hair, weathered face, the kind of person who'd seen too much HOA nonsense to still care about politeness. "Don't let her get to you," he said quietly. "Name's Mike. Been dealing with Carla for years. She finds us for the color of our mailboxes. Last month, she had a neighbor's, wages garnished over a rose. Bush." He looked back toward the clubhouse. "She's untouchable. Or at least she thinks she is." Then he lowered his voice even more. "Her brother runs the construction company that got the pipeline contract. She pushed the board to approve it. And she's making a fortune off the kickbacks." His words hit me like a jolt of electricity. Suddenly, the pieces started fitting together. The arrogance, the rush, the secrecy. They weren't just stealing my land. They were running a business built on lies. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the documents she'd handed me, her signature bold across every page. And I realized something important. If she could twist the law in her favor, maybe I could use the truth to twist it back. For the next few days, I couldn't shake Mike's words. They echoed in my head every time. I looked out the window and saw those trenches cutting through my pasture like open wounds. The HOA didn't just want water, they wanted power. And Carla's smug confidence made one thing clear. She thought no one would ever look close enough to see what she was really doing. So, I decided to look closer. One gray afternoon, with rain threatening on the horizon, I pulled on my boots and followed the trench line. The machines were gone for the day, leaving behind a path of churned mud and broken fences. The smell of diesel hung in the air. I traced the trench's direction across the pasture, and that's when I noticed something odd. The pipeline didn't follow the logical route toward the main road. It took a sharp turn across the rockiest section of my land. an area engineers usually avoid because it's hard to dig. I'd seen the survey map Carla's team had shown me, and this wasn't it. They'd altered the plans. My gut told me something didn't add up. So I kept walking, following the path of the destruction. The deeper I went, the more I heard it. A faint gurgling beneath the noise of the wind. Water. Not from the creek, but something purer, older. I pushed through a patch of overgrown brush until I saw it. A small, bubbling spring rising straight from the ground. Clear, cold, and untouched. That's when everything clicked. The HOA hadn't tapped into the public creek that ran across my boundary. They'd stolen water from a completely different source. A private spring that didn't even sit on my property. It belonged to an old neighboring parcel a few hundred yards upstream, land that had been left vacant since its owner passed away years ago. They thought no one would ever check. Carla's entire project was based on a lie, a hidden theft buried under paperwork and arrogance. Standing there in the mud, I couldn't help but smile for the first time in weeks. They thought they'd taken everything from me, but they didn't even know where the water truly lived. The next morning, I called an old friend, George Lindell, a retired hydrologist I'd served alongside years ago. He wasn't much for small talk, but when I told him what I'd found, he grunted softly. "Sounds like they built a straw in the wrong glass," he said. "Mind if I take a look?" He drove over that same afternoon. Together we crossed through the brush to the spring, and I watched his face change from curiosity to quiet disbelief. "Jack," he said finally, kneeling beside the bubbling water, "this spring feeds your entire valley. If the HOA is tapping into it, they're breaking more than a few county laws." He looked up at me with a faint smirk. "You realize what this means, right?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah," I said. "It means they just built their pipeline on someone else's property." That night, I pulled up the county's online property records. The name of the land's owner, Arthur Miller, had a red mark next to it. Deceased. Property taxes unpaid. The land was in foreclosure, set for auction in 2 weeks. 10 acres of wild, overgrown pasture, and the true source of all their water. The starting bid wasn't much, but it was nearly everything I had left. I sat there staring at the screen, the cursor blinking beside the words, "Place bid." For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt since the day they tore down Claire's Oak. Hope, sharp, dangerous, and alive. The following days moved like a blur of determination. I had 2 weeks until the auction, and every hour mattered. I drove into town, liquidated what little savings I had left, and sold off a few things that meant the world to me. My old restored tractor. A gift Claire had once called the most beautiful waste of money she'd ever seen. I even cashed in the last of my veterans' bonds, knowing full well this was my last shot at reclaiming control. Each transaction felt like cutting away a piece of my safety net. But I didn't hesitate. If I was going down, I'd go down fighting for the land that carried my family's name. Elise noticed, of course. Kids always do. One night, she found me sitting at the table, staring at the county auction site glowing on my old computer screen. "Grandpa," she asked softly, "are you scared?" Her voice was small but steady. I looked at her, at those same blue eyes her mother once had, and told her the truth. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm scared, but I'm more afraid of what happens if I don't stand up for this place." She didn't say anything else, just reached over and took my hand. Sometimes that's all the strength a man needs. When the auction finally started, my heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the ticking of the clock. Other bidders joined in, pushing the price higher with every refresh of the screen. I waited until the last 10 seconds, took a deep breath, and entered my full amount, every dollar I had left in the world. The page blinked. Bid accepted. Then came the words that made my hands shake. Sold. I sat there in silence for a long moment, the glow of the monitor reflecting in my coffee cup. It wasn't joy I felt. It was justice slowly taking form. When the deed came through a week later, George returned with his maps and that quiet, knowing smile of his. "So," he said, unfolding a chart across my table, "you really bought the heart of the valley." I nodded. "Now let's make sure it beats for the right people." Our plan wasn't complicated, just clever. The spring had 2 natural outflows, one feeding the HOA's illegal line, the other long buried beneath years of neglect. All we had to do was clear the old blocked channel and let nature take its course. We spent half a day shoveling, rerouting, and reinforcing the banks with rocks from the creek bed. When the water finally began to flow freely again, it shimmered like silver under the sun. bypassing the HOA's trench entirely. In that moment, the earth itself seemed to take my side. 3 hours later, the first calls started flying through the neighborhood. I didn't need to hear them. I could picture it all from my porch. Sprinklers sputtering dry, taps hissing with air, and 100 manicured lawns turning brown in real time. The HOA's multi-million-dollar community upgrade had just gone dry. By noon, I saw the first service truck racing down the hill, followed by another. Then came Carla's pristine white SUV, dust trailing behind it like a comet of rage. She stomped across my driveway, waving her clipboard like it could still save her. "What did you do?" she screamed. I didn't move from my chair. "Nothing," I said calmly, sipping my coffee. "Looks like your water ran out." Her face twisted red as I handed her a neatly folded document, the deed to the Miller property. "That's where your water comes from," I said evenly. "And as of last week, it belongs to me." For the first time since I'd met her, Carla didn't have a single word to say. Carla stood there frozen, her expensive shoes sinking into my dirt driveway, eyes darting across the document like it was written in another language. When she finally looked up, all that smug authority she once carried was gone. "You can't do this," she stammered. I met her gaze, steady as stone. "I already did. You built a pipeline on property that doesn't belong to you. And you've been stealing my water ever since." She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could find the words, her phone rang. From where I stood, I could hear the panicked shouting on the other end, angry homeowners demanding to know why their faucets had run dry. Carla's face turned pale. She turned without another word, climbed into her car, and sped off in a cloud of dust. By the next morning, word had spread. The HOA was in chaos. Contractors were blaming engineers. Engineers were blaming weather. And the board was blaming each other. I just watched from a distance, quiet and patient. A few days later, I received a formal letter requesting my immediate presence at an emergency HOA meeting. It was obvious. This was going to be the final showdown. When I arrived, the clubhouse was packed wall to wall. Angry homeowners filled every seat, their frustration boiling over after weeks of brown lawns, empty pools, and useless apologies. At the front table sat Carla, trying to hold her composure, with the HOA president, a nervous man named Henderson, fumbling with his gavel. Carla began to speak, her voice brittle. "We've encountered an unforeseen geological issue," she said into the microphone. "Our engineers are doing everything they can to restore the water supply." Someone in the front row shouted, "A geological issue? My well works fine. Maybe the issue is sitting at that table." The crowd erupted in agreement. Henderson tried to calm them, but it was too late. They'd already lost control. That's when I walked down the aisle with a folder in my hand. The room went silent. I set the papers on the table in front of them. The new deed, the original water rights, and the real county maps showing the true source of the spring. "There's no geological issue," I said calmly into the microphone. "You built your precious pipeline on stolen land." Murmurs spread through, the crowd like wildfire. George stepped up beside me, unfolding one of his hydrology charts and explaining in simple terms how the HOA's entire system was illegally diverting water from my newly purchased property. Every eye turned toward Carla. The truth was out, undeniable and public. Her face went white, her voice cracking as she shouted, "He's lying! He's trying to extort this community!" I didn't even respond. I just slid one more paper across the table, copies of the contracts Mike had helped me obtain. They showed that her brother's construction company had won the pipeline bid through a fake bidding process, inflated prices, forged signatures, and kickbacks funneled straight to Carla. The room exploded in outrage. Henderson slammed his gavel, but no one was listening anymore. A woman from the second row stood up and shouted, "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in Carla Withers." Hands shot up across the room. It was unanimous. Carla's reign ended in seconds. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, her face twisted in disbelief. That night she lost everything, her position, her reputation, and the illusion of control she'd built on lies. Weeks later, her desperation drove her to one final mistake. She snuck onto my property in the middle of the night, trying to use a backhoe to block the water channel George and I had cleared. What she didn't know was that my trail camera caught every second of it. From her cutting the lock on my gate to the moment she flooded a neighbor's, shed with mud and debris. When the deputies arrived, they found her knee-deep in the mess, screaming excuses. She was arrested on the spot for trespassing. vandalism, and illegal tampering with a waterway. The next morning, the footage aired on local news. 6 months have passed since that night. The trenches on my land are gone. The grass has grown back, and in place of Claire's fallen oak, I planted a new sapling. It's small but strong, just like the peace that's finally returned here. The HOA elected a new board, Henderson, George, Mike, and me. Together we rewrote every bylaw, giving homeowners the voice they should have had all along. And down by the spring we put up a sign carved by hand. Claire's well. Sometimes I sit on the porch with Elise, listening to the quiet murmur of the creek, and she'll smile and say, "It feels like home again." And she's right, because this land isn't just dirt or fences, it's memory, promise, and proof that when someone tries to steal what's yours, you don't just fight back. You remind them who it really belongs to.